The United States is nothing without its immigrants and immigrant stories, and Real Americans is no exception to that rule. However, this is not your typical immigrant story. Rachel Chong paints a beautiful story of 3 generations of American Chinese people. But unlike most immigration stories, this one doesn't start with the immigrant. This is a beautifully written exploration into the immigrant story, the problems when greed meets science, the issues of race and class, and lastly, time. In this episode, we will explore how each of these ideas is handled and how the plot and characterization play into this narrative. The story starts with Lily, who is a college student struggling to find a job after completing her last year at NYU. Lily meets Matthew at a work party, and the rest is history. The two fall in love on their first date, and Matthew sweets her off to Paris. Matthew falls quickly for Lily, and after a few hiccups, the two end up together. I believe it's because Lily is so down to earth. Even though Matthew is insanely rich, Lily doesn't try to use him for his money. She meets his needs, whether that's holding his hand during a rough plane ride or making him dinner. She doesn't use him, but appreciates him. Lily is happy with her life, and although she has difficulty having a child, she doesn't think twice about this until her mother confronts her about it after she had a difficult conversation with Matthew's father. It turns out that these two families have a history. I thought the way we received information in this story was brilliant. In the front jacket of the book, we read about Lily and her relationship with Matthew, and then in the next paragraph, it talks about how Lily is alone with her son Nick about 16 years later. So we know from the beginning that something will go wrong with Lily and Matthew. However, we don't really know what that is until midway through the book, and not truly till part 3. That being said, this book doesn't seem to have a typical plot structure. Each part of this book is like its own mini-story that moves us further in time, but not exactly further along in the plot. I would say that the overall conflict in this book is the fight between Lily and May that is resolved at the climax. However, there are many subplots that tie into the main plot, most of them having to do with Matthew. What do you think the main plot of this book was? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Before I move to character, I'd like to discuss the end of this book. At the end of the novel, the whole family is in the same room in the one moment. We don't get to see if they decide to forgive each other and move on, or what happened next. I honestly was surprised by the abrupt ending of the novel. I both loved and hated it at the same time. I loved it because it gives us hope that Lily was able to forgive May and make amends with Nick. Also, the way things ended with Matthew and Nick, they might be able to make amends as well. However, we don't get much resolution. Do you think there was a purpose for this? I'm not sure what her purpose was, but I really like when a book gives us a little bit more resolution. I get that it's not as realistic, but I don't know, I just like it. So let's move to characters. As I said earlier, each character gets their own part. Part 1 is about Lily. I personally loved Lily, and though I found myself relating more to Lily than the other characters, I think that she's such a strong and resilient woman. When we first meet Lily, she's trying to figure out what she wants to be after college. Her relationship with Matthew is actually a strong one, so when you see in the front jacket that the two of them don't end up working, you wonder why. And the romantic in me would love to see them back together. However, that wasn't the point of the story. Lily has the ability to leave all of the wealth and live such a simple life. After literally having everything she thought she wanted, she realized that life was hollow, and she looked for the importance. If I understood it correctly, she learns how to cook more Chinese dishes and tries to connect more with her roots. She also keeps her and Nick off the grid. Yes, probably to protect Nick, but more importantly, to keep him grounded. Lily might not have been the perfect parent, but honestly, Nick is a kind, grounded, and thoughtful, if not a little bit narcissistic kid. It's clear that Lily is genuinely happy taking care of others and creating her own life after her own is blown up. If you ask me, that's a brave woman. Nick seems to be like many people his age, a bit anxious, but he also doesn't really know who he is. Whether that is a statement about children who grew up without fathers or not, it's clear that Nick learning about Matthew from someone other than Lily made him a bit of a boat without mooring. I don't think I'm alone in feeling sad for Nick for this whole book. He struggles through college, losing his best friend, then his girlfriend, and then at last losing his half-brother and his relationship with his father. Nick struggles for identity could be because he's half Chinese, even though he doesn't look Chinese at all. Or it could be because he's so inquisitive. Nick is the person that ties his mother and May together. He has much of his mother's sensibility of knowing what's most important in life. He connects with his grandmother and tries to understand the world and the people around him. However, he's driven and understands science much like May. He even ends up in the same field as May did. He chooses to study gene editing. I love the idea that as families we are connected by how we are similar and different at the same time. My favorite thing that Nick does is ask difficult questions. For example, in part 3, when they're talking about parents being able to pick genes that they pass on to their kids, would they edit out kids like his secretary completely? These questions never truly get answered, and I love that as a reader. Questions are posed, and I get to fill them in with my own thoughts and answers. Brilliant. If I had to choose one quote to sum May up, it would be this one. I wasn't a lucky person. I never defied the odds. Even my being born a Chinese woman had been the likeliest of all possible humans. Honestly, May had the most difficult life. Her storyline in China during Mao's revolution was the most fascinating to me. I honestly know very little about communist China and life under Mao, other than that the Chinese were very repressed. It was interesting to see it through the eyes of a young adult, a very ambitious young adult. May gives up so much to break free of all of that repression. She gives up her relationship with her family, her lover, and her culture just to be able to study and learn. That's a large sacrifice, but it also led her to the place she wanted to be, except for when it tore her away from the person she loved the most, her daughter. Which leads me to the first theme, families. Families, and in particular, families of immigrants. Rachel Chong is the child of an immigrant, and she herself even mourns that she never learned Chinese. It makes sense that immigrants only speak English at home to give their kids a fighting chance. But also, language is such an important part of who we are. This is a common thing amongst immigrant books. The lack of common language to explain how a person feels or is. One of my favorite quotes from the book was this. With each other, they spoke loudly. Their voices periodically rose to excited shouts, and they laughed raucously. In English, they were mild-mannered, polite. My mother had always spoken English to me. Now I wonder if in doing so, she had not fully been herself. End quote. I teach English at a school with many international students. Most of them speak multiple languages, and I love to hear their insights about learning English and how it makes them feel. Many of these conversations come back to the idea that they are a different person when they speak a different language. Although May speaks English very well, it wasn't the language she grew up speaking, so it makes sense that she's a different person when she speaks Chinese. Lily feels an ache to understand her mother and her mother's decisions. It's clear that they're not close. There appears to be this barrier between them. This is an idea that impacts many immigrant stories. but I also think it's relatable between most parent-child dynamics. This book has a lot, yet not a lot to say about generational wealth. Matthew is such an interesting character. When we first meet Matthew, it seems like he's trying to make a name for himself. He uses another last name, and he distances himself from his family. However, by the end of the first part of the novel, he has come back into the fold, and between part 1 and part 2, he makes choices not to leave the family with Lily. Honestly, this decision didn't sit right with me. I have a hard time believing that Matthew would give up his relationship with Lily and Nick. This decision didn't make sense to me. Did it make sense to you? Make sure to let me know in the comments. Although the main conflict of this novel didn't really touch on wealth, I did find it interesting that the people in this book with the most money were not the happiest. Yes, it's true that many of them developed depression that seemed to be genetically passed down. However, it's clear that money doesn't buy happiness. Lily and Nick lived a very simple life, and they were able to have happiness, while Matthew had his mother, his brother, and his son taken away from him. It doesn't matter how much money you have, you cannot save yourself from the pain of life. What connects us from generation to generation? Is it our DNA, our morals, or maybe our stories? When the main family in this book are connected by DNA and pain, they're also connected by the sense of time. A few people in this novel seem to discuss the ability to feel like you're stopping time. Lily writes on an internet chat room, and Nick finds her initial chat room thread, not knowing it was her, and relates to her thoughts and ideas. May talks about how time moves around her. It's clear that time is a thing that was thought about in this novel. Now, this was not a piece of fantasy, so it makes me question what Chong was trying to tell us about time. In an interview with PBS, Chong talks about how she thinks about time so often, and about how Americans see time as a commodity. This is clearly an idea that is echoed throughout the novel. For May, time was something she always wanted more of. She wanted to prove herself and use her time to accomplish something. However, her daughter Lily was so different. Lily saw time as an exploration. She wanted to spend her time as a meaningful part of her community and with the people she loved. This could be because of their culture. May grew up with nothing and fought for everything in her life. Her knowledge, her job, her place. Whereas Lily always had everything that she needed, and she tried to live on less. There is also Nick, who seems to split the difference between them. Nick grew up in a very minimalist home. Doing so made him very down to earth, and that moved into adulthood with him. However, Nick does seem interested in his legacy and what he does with his time. Here are 3 quotes that show the idea of time in the book. First, from May. Flies were more difficult to catch, smaller creatures. Time felt more slowly. Kong Ti explained to me, a fly could move from under your swatter because it could see it in motion. A larger creature, a creature like us, perceived time as passing faster. As you got older, time passed faster and faster and faster, until at last it was over. Kong Ti said that it had seemed impossible to me as a child tortured by my brothers. Time felt indeterminable. Lily's quote was this: to Lily, flowers were a marvel. Season after season they erupted into their astounding array of colors and shapes and scents, brilliantly existing, never considering the question of what for. And lastly, Nick. Time had stopped, and I was outside of it. If I could turn every worry over, I might come to the correct decision. It's clear that time means something different for each generation, but I'm not sure what the overall meaning was meant to be. After reading this, I have been pondering over the importance of my family and how time with your family is the most important thing. This could be what she wanted from us to think about at the end of the book. What do you want to do with your time? What does it mean to you? And again, I love that Chong leaves us to draw our own conclusions. She puts questions out there for us to answer ourselves. The last two ideas that are covered in this book go hand in hand. They are gene editing and race. This book doesn't straight out cover race and the injustices of how people of different races are treated. Obviously, this idea is touched on, but it wasn't done in a heavy-handed way. I love how Rachel Chong handles this topic. Obviously, May struggled coming to the United States since she grew up in China. However, she knew that in order to have a future and for her daughter to have a future, she needed to speak English well to prove her worth and value. There isn't a whole lot of racism in their lab that we see. However, it's clear that because they are Chinese, they are expected to work hard, and May is happy to do so. When we meet Lily, it's clear that she doesn't really see herself as Chinese. She doesn't know Chinese. She doesn't know how to cook Chinese food. She is American, and that is something her parents are proud of. They wanted her to be an American. However, we see her deal with a bit of racism at work when she is with Matthew. It's an interesting idea that comes with gene editing and race, comes more with May and Nick. Nick is half Chinese, but because of gene editing, he looks just like Matthew. He has blue eyes, light skin, and light hair. Because of this, sometimes people make inappropriate comments around him, assuming that he'll be okay with it, since he doesn't look Chinese at all. Gene editing is fascinating. That parents can just pick and choose the things they want for their children and the things they don't. It's clear to me that Chong doesn't think that it's the greatest of ideas from the way that Nick responds and answers questions throughout the book. However, the fact that Nick didn't get depression like his brother Sam is a boon for him. Also, the fact that he looks like a white man is a boon as well. What do you think the author wanted us to think about race and gene editing? I do think that there's a clear answer in this book, and that she helps us to see the problems with gene editing and race. I love when authors aren't didactic. I think I've said that 1,800 times. And this book just allows you to process your ideas. I thought the book was a thoughtful look into many current ideas: wealth, inheritance, generational identity, and time. Chong leads us through these ideas with a gentle hand, asking us to ponder on what we think about them instead of hammering in her own ideas. Because of this is a book I haven't been able to stop thinking about. I rated this book 5 out of 5 stars. It is thoughtful, relevant, and beautiful. Thank you for listening to this episode of According to Your English Teacher. If you want to keep up with what I'm reading, make sure to follow me on Instagram at according.toyourenglishTeacher. I'm also on Goodreads, and you can find me under Sam Gunther, According to Your English Teacher. I'd love to hear your thoughts about this episode of the podcast. I'd love for you to send me an email or leave me a comment below. That would be amazing. Remember, the podcasts only get found when people engage with them. So if you like this episode, please give it a like or leave the podcast a review. Also, if you want to share it with a friend, that would be so helpful. I'd like to leave you with one last quote. But most people in America, those who are fed and clothed and housed, can choose what to care about. From your comfortable position, you can decide if you want to know about people in Syria or Myanmar with a flip of the television switch. Thanks for listening to this episode of According to Your English Teacher. This episode was written by me, Sam Gunther, and edited by Dallin Gunther. Next week on the podcast, we will be covering the book The Measure by Nick Lee Ehrlich. Thanks for listening and happy reading.